I'm Steve Skojak, and this is the OnePeterFive Minute. Well, hello there, OnePeterFivers, and welcome to another edition of the OnePeterFive Minute, where we talk about big things happening in the news and try to keep it short and sweet. Today, however, it's going to be a little less short and, frankly, not very sweet at all. We have something important to talk about, and that is the statement made by Archbishop Wilton Gregory of Washington, D.C., who is seeming more and more like the natural heir to the cretinous bishops who preceded him in that diocese. But to talk about what he did that set my blood to boiling, we need to talk first about something else, and that is the death of George Floyd. Now look, I know everyone is talking about it. I know you're sick of hearing about it, most likely, but I want to make my position on this clear. What happened to that poor man was an unconscionable abuse of power, full stop. In my view, it looked like murder in broad daylight, on camera, no less. The sheer flagrancy of it blew me away. And I've got to be honest, I couldn't even bring myself to watch the whole video. I'm not a fan of snuff films, and it was just awful. I had to shut it off. Now, my immediate response to the situation was as follows. I tweeted out, basically, this is why Black Lives Matter exists. And yeah, that kind of thing gets overly politicized, but this should never, ever, ever happen. Now, I was being very generous in my use of the phrase overly politicized, as the subsequent riots have shown, as does the fear of being even associated with being on the wrong side of this movement. For example, my friend and fellow Catholic media guy Tim Gordon was fired from his teaching position at a Catholic high school this week, simply for tweeting out that Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization. Now, whether you agree with Tim or not, the fact that the nation is on fire right now in the name of Black Lives Matter protests should at least protect the question as an exercise, a legitimate exercise of the freedom of speech. No such luck in his diocese, I suppose. And even so, I understand the desire for a movement. As a traditional Catholic, I get this in a smaller way. I've been part of a marginal group that never gets a fair hearing for the past 16 years. That eats at you. Over time, it makes you bitter. And that's nothing compared to what many of these folks have faced in their day-to-day lives. But you see, we've got this thing here in America I've been railing against a lot lately. And it's what I like to call binary tribalism. This or that. You're liberal or conservative. You're orthodox or you're heretic. You're pro-Orwellianism, or you think coronavirus is a hoax and nobody should ever be locked down for a pandemic. You're a racist or you're a BLM booster. Growing up as a conservative kid in this country, learning my politics largely from talk radio, I cut my teeth on the us versus them rhetoric, which is part of my framework. A fable of clearly defined good and evil in black and white, no pun intended. But as I've grown older and had more experiences, I've come to recognize the complicated mess we tend to be as human beings. We don't all fit into neat camps with convenient labels. We're sinners trying to be saints. The point is, I'm not coming at this issue from a position of dismissiveness. I know the issues in play are real, even if they are exaggerated for political purposes. I recognize that there is a legitimate reason for some of this outrage, but not this, not rioting, not burning down your own city, not beating unarmed women with boards like they did in Rochester, or curb stomping a man to death like they did in Dallas, both of whom were just attempting to defend their stores from looting. Let's be honest, there's absolutely nothing that looting Apple stores and stealing Louis Vuitton bags, burning down buildings and beating shop owners to death in the streets has to do with George Floyd or the memory of the injustice he suffered. In fact, his own girlfriend and brother have both indicated publicly that he would have been horrified by the response. A number of people have been shot during the riots, including police officers, and some have been killed. I've not yet seen any estimates on property damage, but across the nation, it has been extensive, and all of this is coinciding with an already paralyzed economy due to the pandemic lockdown. Where's the justice in any of that? In response to all of this, President Trump has taken a hard line on getting these riots under control before things got even further out of hand. He has allowed state and local authorities to deal with what is unfolding the way they see fit, but he's threatened to take action, including military force, if they do not. For people sitting at home or in their businesses, wondering when the mob is going to come for them, burn down their place, break their windows, steal their stuff, that's a reassuring stance. But with Trump, as usual, every action is polarizing, and Archbishop Gregory has clearly taken the other side. Gregory was outraged that the president and the first lady made a photographed appearance at the John Paul II shrine in D.C. this week, calling it, quote, reprehensible. Gregory is, incidentally, apparently not concerned about his own safety from within his multi-million-dollar penthouse up on Embassy Row in D.C. If you've never been up there, it's the nicest part of Washington. In a statement released by the diocese, Gregory said, quote, I find it baffling and reprehensible that any Catholic facility would allow itself to be so egregiously misused and manipulated in a fashion that violates our religious principles, which calls us to defend the rights of all people, even those with whom we might disagree. Irony much, Bishop Gregory? St. Pope John Paul II was an ardent defender of the rights and dignity of human beings. His legacy bears vivid witness to that truth. He certainly would not condone the use of tear gas and other deterrents to silence, scatter, or intimidate them for a photo opportunity in front of a place of worship and peace. Now, I was scratching my head a little bit at first, but ostensibly this statement about tear gas is partially in reference to the president's photo op at historic St. John's Episcopal Church near the White House, which was not the subject of his statement. The John Paul II shrine was. Different events. Now, protesters were cleared from the area in front of St. John's so the president could visit after the church was set on fire. Allegedly, tear gas was used on that crowd, though the White House and the Park Service have denied the allegations. What this had to do with Trump's visit to the JP2 shrine, though, is anyone's guess. Gregory was not deterred by the fact that the presidential visit had been scheduled long before the death of George Floyd, or that he was there to mark the occasion of his signing of a new executive order on religious liberty, something that, according to Gregory's own comments, he should be supportive of. If Gregory thinks the president has done something morally wrong, if Trump has overstepped his bounds, morally speaking, as the Catholic Archbishop of D.C., he should absolutely say so, but not in the context of him taking an executive action that even a man like Gregory would ostensibly support. This looks like nothing so much as political opportunism and point scoring. It's virtue signaling. And it evokes a description Catholic writer John Zmirak recently penned about the bishops, in fact, in reference to this incident. He said, they're a bunch of gay Democrats with pointy hats. And that's the real concern here. Gregory's own conduct as the former head of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and the leader of one of the most important dioceses in the United States. If you want to know where Gregory's loyalties lie, it's not hard to find them. For example, he called the election of Barack Obama in 2008, quote, a great step forward for humanity, end quote. Last year, Gregory didn't find it reprehensible in the slightest when the rabidly leftist, pro-abortion, self-proclaimed Catholic politician Nancy Pelosi got up and gave a eulogy at a funeral mass in his own cathedral for fellow pro-abortion journalist Cokie Roberts. In fact, it was during a mass that he offered, at which he referred to Roberts, who, by the way, characterized pro-lifers as extremists. He called Cokie Roberts a wise woman of faith and a servant of the truth. Bulldog reporter George Neumeier took Gregory to task in an article for the American Spectator last year. Quote, shortly after his elevation to Archbishop of Washington, D.C., he wrote, Wilton Gregory made a great show of promising to listen to a wounded laity. It was total BS. Gregory is notorious for freezing out lay Catholics and priests who dare to criticize the ultimate source of the wounds, a gay mafia that has promoted pederasts for decades. Neumeier notes that Gregory acknowledged years ago that the priesthood was at risk of turning into a, quote, gay profession, but also that he is a protege of Cardinal Bernardin, described well by Neumeier as, quote, wicked and a deviant of staggering proportions, who, with the help of the media, passed himself off as an ecclesiastical Mr. Rogers. Shortly before his appointment to D.C., Gregory showed that actions speak louder than words, when it was reported that the priest appointed as spiritual director for victims of sexual abuse by clergy in his diocese appointed by him was known for being pro-LGBT and was in fact photographed hanging out at a drag bar at a show marketed as, quote, dirty and nasty, end quote, by the organization itself. He also demonstrated this at a priestly convocation in Atlanta in 2012. A priest I spoke with, who was present at the time, told the story of a discussion held behind closed doors that came up about rectory life and the various problems that occur among brother priests. At one point, a priest raised his hand and proposed the idea that maybe the problems were related to the number of gay clergy in the archdiocese. The witness described how a stunned silence fell over the room. He said you could have heard a pin drop, while Gregory appeared visibly upset by the question. After regaining his composure and fumbling for a response, he gave a boilerplate answer about how the diocese was following the norms in terms of the pastoral plan for the care of homosexual persons. In contrast to the shock when the question was presented, the room erupted in what this source described as thunderous applause at the bishop's response. It was then, according to my source, that he realized just how much worse the homosexual problem in the priesthood truly was. What he saw in that room 8 years ago was a critical moment for him, and the story has stuck with me for years. Gregory's track record of gay affirmative actions as Bishop of Atlanta are long enough that I don't want to list them here. Check the show notes for more information. But let's just say he's a fan of James Martin S.J. and has allowed Fortunate and Faithful Families, a pro-LGBT group, to be active in his diocese. But he also allowed Theodore McCarrick to be the point man responding to the sexual abuse crisis during Gregory's tenure as president of the USCCB. How have we ever let him live that down? Neumeier mentions that Gregory's nickname is the Queen of the Nile, a reference not to Gregory's race, according to Neumeier, but his Cleopatra-like imperiousness. And he did get himself into very hot water by building a $2.2 million mansion for himself in Buckhead, the most upscale suburb of Atlanta. The scathing pushback he received from the faithful ultimately led him to sell that building in disgrace. Fortunately for Gregory's posh and expensive tastes, he inherited the opulence of Cardinals Wuerl and McCarrick. But one wonders if the more important part of his nickname is the word queen, Queen of the Nile. My priest source from Atlanta said he always had that impression, and the name was commonly referenced by seminarians. The late psychotherapist Richard Sipe, who spent 25 years studying celibate and sexual behavior in the priesthood, publicly opined that he believed Gregory has a homosexual orientation. Now, nothing is certain, we can't be sure, but time and again when it comes to corruption in the church, a refusal to uphold faith and morals, theological impoverishment, and feckless leadership from our bishops, the question of homosexuality seems to rise to the fore. These men, and I use the term very loosely, are running our church. They have a chokehold on all of the institutions, and if they're not gay themselves, they're certainly friendly to those who are. They work collectively against Catholic orthodoxy and unceasingly place impediments and scandals before the faithful. They are career bureaucrats looking to capitalize on politically correct public sentiment whenever and wherever possible, often living lavish lives at the expense of the souls they exist to serve. The death of George Floyd was a vicious and unnecessary act, and it represents a tragedy that should arouse righteous anger in all of us, an anger that demands justice. But what we are seeing is not justice. The destruction of life and property that has gone on across the nation in the past week is a demonic response, not a Christian one. It is anarchy and chaos. And Archbishop Gregory appears to have chosen, once again, that side, not ours. Thank you for your support. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. God bless you.